Every dashboard had one, and today most cars still have the hole, but not the thing that filled it. Push this little knob in, wait for the pop, and it sprang back glowing red-hot in a coil. A tiny ritual on nearly every drive. In a minute, you'll see a camera that spit the photo straight into your hand, so everyone could crowd around and watch the picture slowly appear. And later, a booth on the corner with a folding door, where a single coin was all it took to call home from anywhere. 20 everyday things that have almost completely vanished. Keep count of how many you used yourself, and remember the one you handled most.
Channel numbers and show titles, printed on cheap paper, with a color cover of a television star out front. That's the weekly TV guide, and for millions of homes it was a daily reference. There was no on-screen menu and no way to scroll through listings. If you wanted to know what came on at 8, or plan your whole evening, you reached for this and ran your finger down the column. It sat on the coffee table or by the set, dog-eared and marked up by the end of the week. On-screen program guides and streaming menus made it unnecessary, but for a long time, checking this little book was simply part of every night in front of the television. Here's a heavy object with a wheel of finger holes on the front. You didn't press it. You put a finger in a hole, pulled the wheel all the way around, and waited for it to spin back before the next number. That's the rotary dial telephone, and boomers used it every single day, usually the one phone the whole family shared. Most homes leased it from the phone company, which is why so many looked the same. It was tied to the wall by a coiled cord that someone was always stretching around a doorway for privacy. Touch tone, then cordless, then mobile phones ended it entirely. But that whirring dial return and the long tangled cord are things a whole generation used without a second thought. Here's a thick, heavy book, sometimes two, with thin yellow and white pages packed edge to edge with names, numbers, and addresses in tiny print. That's the phone book. To find anyone's number, or any business in town, you looked it up here. The white pages listed people alphabetically, and the yellow pages listed businesses by category, thick with ads. Every home got one dropped on the doorstep once a year. You kept it by the phone, and it doubled as a booster seat and a doorstop. The internet and mobile phones made it obsolete, and the giant annual delivery quietly stopped. But for decades, finding a number meant flipping through those tissue-thin pages. Here's a slim booklet in a vinyl cover, with a pen tucked in, and a little register in the back full of handwritten entries. That's the checkbook. Before debit cards and taps, this was how people paid for most things. At the grocery store, you'd pull it out at the register, write in the amount and the date, sign it, and tear off the check while the line waited behind you. Then you carefully recorded it in the register, so you'd know your balance, since there was no app to check. It went everywhere, in a purse or a jacket pocket. Debit cards and electronic payment made writing checks rare, but for a long time this was simply how you bought your groceries. Here's a small round object in the car dashboard. You pushed it in, waited a few seconds, and it popped back out on its own, glowing red-hot in a coil. That's the car cigarette lighter. Nearly every dashboard had one, and pushing it in and waiting for the pop was a small everyday ritual for drivers. When it came back out, the coil was hot enough to light a cigarette in seconds. Over time, the socket outlived the lighter itself, quietly turning into the power outlet we now use to charge phones. Many cars dropped the actual heating element altogether, but that glowing coil, and the faint smell of it, is a daily detail a lot of boomers remember from every car ride. Here's a thin sheet of dark, inky paper, sandwiched between two blank pages and fed into a typewriter. It made your hands smudgy just to handle it. That's carbon paper. Before copiers and printers were on every desk, this was how you made a copy of what you typed. The pressure of the keys pushed ink from the carbon sheet onto the page beneath, so one pass through the typewriter produced an original and a duplicate at once. Office workers handled it every day, and the smudges came with the job. It's where the CC in email still comes from, short for carbon copy. Photocopiers and computers made it obsolete, but anyone who typed for a living remembers loading those inky sheets. Here's a rack of folded paper maps at the gas station, branded with an oil company logo, free for the taking, while an attendant fills your tank and cleans your windshield. That's the fold-out roadmap. And for boomers, it was the everyday tool of getting anywhere unfamiliar. You spread it across your lap or the hood, traced the route with a finger, and refolded it, usually badly. There was no voice telling you where to turn. The full-service station gave these away to build loyalty, back when someone pumped your gas and checked your oil without being asked. The 1970s gas crisis ended the free maps, and GPS finished the job. But the family argument over folding it back correctly is pure everyday memory. Here's a small pocket radio with a dial and a speaker grill, often with a single earphone and a wrist strap. It went everywhere with a whole generation. That's the transistor radio. It was the everyday way to carry music and the news, small enough for a shirt pocket or a beach bag. Teenagers especially lived by it, tuning in Top 40, or the ball game anywhere they went. You may remember one earphone in, catching one more song after bedtime, or a group clustered around a single radio at the pool. Cassette players, then the Walkman, then phones absorbed the idea. But for years, this was how you took your music with you, every single day. Here's a camera that spits out a small square photo right after the click, and you shake it and wait as the picture slowly appears before your eyes. That's the instant camera, most famously the Polaroid. Before phones put a camera in every pocket, this was the closest thing to instant photos. No film to drop off, no waiting a week for prints. You snapped the shot, the photo slid out, and everyone crowded around to watch it develop. It was a fixture at parties, holidays, and everyday family moments. Digital cameras and then smartphones made instant film a niche. But watching a Polaroid slowly appear in your hand was a small daily magic for a whole generation. Here's a tall booth on the corner, with a hinged door, a coin slot, and a phone inside. Step in, pull the door shut, and drop in a coin to make a call. That's the payphone, often standing in its own booth. Away from home, this was how everyone made a call, dropping in a dime and dialing. You kept spare change in your pocket just for it, and knew where the nearest one stood. They were on street corners, in stations, and outside stores, a completely ordinary part of daily life. Mobile phones made them vanish so thoroughly that younger people mostly know them from movies. But boomers use them constantly, and remember the muffled quiet with the door pulled shut. Here's a glass bottle of milk on the doorstep at dawn, cool to the touch, with the cream risen to the top and a note tucked beside the empties. That's home milk delivery, brought daily by the milkman. Before it was easy to keep large amounts of milk cold at home, and before the supermarket run became routine, fresh milk simply arrived at your door in glass bottles that were washed and refilled. You left the empties out with a note for the next delivery. Home refrigeration, supermarkets, and cheaper store milk ended it by the late 1960s and early 70s. But waiting bottles on the step, cream on top, were part of ordinary mornings for millions. Here's a small paper stamp and a booklet you paste them into, page after page, at the kitchen table. Those are S&H Green Stamps. Boomers collected them nearly every time they shopped. Groceries, gas stations, and stores handed them out based on what you spent, and you saved them in books to trade for merchandise from a reward catalog. Sticking the stamps in was a regular household task, and choosing a prize you'd saved toward for months felt like a real reward. The 1970s recession and gas crisis cooled the whole system, and direct store discounts replaced it. But for a long time, those little green stamps came home with almost every purchase. Here's a sheet of writing paper and a pen, and a hand moving across it in flowing, connected script. That's the handwritten letter, written in cursive. Before texting and email, staying in touch across a distance meant sitting down, writing a letter by hand, and mailing it, then waiting days or weeks for a reply. Cursive was taught to everyone and used every day. You may remember the excitement of finding a personal letter in the mailbox among the bills. Instant messaging replaced most of it, and cursive itself is now barely taught. But the everyday habit of writing by hand, and the joy of receiving a letter, defined how a generation kept in touch. Here's a machine with a tub and two rollers mounted right on top. A younger viewer might guess a pasta maker. It's neither. This is the wringer washing machine, still doing everyday laundry in many homes, especially rural ones, into the 1960s. After washing, you fed each piece through the rollers by hand to squeeze the water out before hanging it to dry. It came with a rule every family repeated, because the rollers didn't know the difference between a shirt and a hand. Keep fingers and hair well clear. The automatic washer's spin cycle wrung clothes for you, faster and far safer. Anyone who used one remembers the daily care it demanded. Here's a heavy machine on a desk with rows of number keys, a handle on the side, and a paper tape feeding out the top. This is not a typewriter. That's the adding machine. Before electronic calculators, offices, shops, and banks did their daily math on one of these. You punched in the figures, pulled the handle, and it printed each number and the running total onto a paper tape you kept as a record. Bookkeepers and clerks spent whole days at these, and the clatter of keys, and the ratchet of the handle were the sound of an office. Cheap electronic calculators made them obsolete almost overnight, but that printed tape was a daily fixture of anyone who worked with numbers. Here's a glass or metal dish sitting right on the coffee table, in the middle of the living room, with a small groove cut into the rim. That's the household ashtray. In an era when smoking indoors was completely normal, ashtrays were everyday furnishings, sitting on coffee tables, kitchen counters, and nightstands throughout the home. Guests expected to find one within reach. Many homes had several scattered around, simply as part of the decor. As attitudes toward smoking changed and indoor smoking declined, the household ashtray quietly disappeared. Today, it's one of the clearest signs of how much daily life has shifted, but for decades it was as ordinary as a coaster. Here's a low wooden cabinet, long and heavy, that looks like furniture. Lift the lid, though, and there's a turntable inside. That's the console stereo, or hi-fi cabinet, usually with an AM/FM radio and speakers built in, often the centerpiece of the living room. You stacked records on the spindle, and they dropped one at a time to play, and it was where the household listened to music every day. On a slow Sunday, the whole room gathered around the sound from that cabinet. Component systems and then portable audio made furniture-sized stereos obsolete, but many can still picture the clunk as the next record dropped onto the platter. This came out on one day of the week and worked with a hot iron. A slim bottle, often ceramic, with a sprinkler head on top. That's the laundry sprinkler bottle. Before wash and wear fabrics and steam irons, cotton clothes needed dampening to press out wrinkles. You'd shake water across a shirt, roll it up so the moisture spread, then iron it smooth, an everyday chore in most households. Ironing was its own routine, with a basket of sprinkled, rolled clothes waiting beside the board. Steam irons and easy care synthetics made the sprinkler unnecessary, but plenty of people can still picture it sitting there, ready for wash day. Getting a clear picture out of this often meant standing perfectly still, holding two thin metal rods at just the right angle, while everyone shouted, "There! Hold it right there!" You already know this is the television antenna, either the rooftop aerial or the tabletop rabbit ears on the set. You adjusted them daily, angling and extending for each channel, and wrapping the tips in foil when the picture rolled. This was simply how nearly every home received TV for decades. Cable, then satellite, then the digital transition changed everything. But the everyday ritual of fiddling with the antenna and the family argument over who had to hold it is something a whole generation shared. Stay up late enough, and something strange used to happen every single night. Television itself would end. First, the national anthem played, then a circular pattern with a drawing of a headdress filled the screen, and after that, nothing but hissing snow until morning. That's the Indian head test pattern and the nightly sign-off. In the 1950s and 60s, stations didn't broadcast around the clock. When programming ended, they played the anthem, put up a test pattern that helped calibrate the picture, and went silent for the night. Picture falling asleep on the couch with the set still on, and waking to a screen full of static, the surest proof you'd made it to the very end of the broadcast day. 24-hour programming, then cable and digital, ended the sign-off for good. It captures a gentler pace, a time when even the television went to sleep. None of these things disappeared because they were badly made. They vanished because the routines around them quietly changed, one convenience at a time. The dial gave way to a screen, the checkbook to a tap, the milk bottle to a supermarket aisle. Baby boomers handled these objects every single day without a second thought, and then, almost without noticing, stopped. The objects slipped out of daily life, but the memories attached to them stayed right where they were. So, how many of these did you use yourself? And which one did your hands know best? Leave it below, and if this brought your everyday past back to life, consider subscribing for the next trip through